Let's speak more about South Africa's failed bid to extradite the Gupta brothers from the UAE. We're joined tonight by legal expert Michael Osborne. Michael, a very good evening to you. I'm grateful for your time. So the decision, basically, to deny South Africa extradition of the Gupta brothers, Atul and Rajesh, was taken in a hearing in the UAE on the 13th of February, news only reaching South Africa in April. How much does that stray from the norm?
It certainly does stray from the norm. The South African government is an interested party. They've put in representations. And in the ordinary course, the UAE authority should have given the South African government some time to prepare and to make representations in February. So it's very far from the norm indeed.
Mm. And just looking at the justice statement here, they say that the court found that on the charge of money laundering, the crime in question is alleged to have been committed in the UAE and South Africa, and that in terms of the federal laws of the UAE, extradition can be denied because the country has jurisdiction to prosecute the brothers on that charge. And then on the charge of fraud, the court found that the arrest warrant related to that charge was cancelled. And the South African government basically describes those as technicalities, but are they legally sufficient grounds to deny extradition?
Well, the first one is known as the doctrine of double jurisdiction. The money laundering part of the charges is alleged to have been perpetrated both in South Africa and in UAE. If that's right, then UAE courts would have jurisdiction, in which case the first legal step is always for the domestic courts of that country to make the decision as to whether it wants to prosecute itself. So in the ordinary course, it's natural. Any nation state will prefer to have the option to prosecute a crime which occurred within its jurisdiction in its own courts. Now, the question arises, that's fine as a matter of principle, but what if the UAE prosecutor never does pick up the charges against the Gupta brothers? In principle, once that decision has been made not to prosecute in UAE, South Africa should have the opportunity to say, well, we now see that notwithstanding you have jurisdiction, you've chosen not to prosecute, give us a chance to continue with our prosecution in South Africa. That could happen.
And in explaining what happened today, government, i.e. the Justice Minister and the NPA, said that this was not a failure by local authorities to extradite the Gupta brothers, but rather that the issue had been handled poorly on the side of the UAE, because even information about when the hearing happened, the outcome was communicated to them much later because they weren't, as South Africa, physically present in the hearing or conducting the arguments themselves. How, I'm trying to phrase this correctly, how much weight would that hold as an argument in an appeal?
It's very hard to speculate how a UAE appellate court would decide this. I am given to understand that it has happened in the past that an appellate court in the UAE has overturned a refusal to extradite. So it's certainly not inconceivable. And if I was representing the South African government, I would certainly make the argument that it's unfair and irregular that the South African government, which has a vested interest in this process, was not allowed to appear in the court in February.
And could or could have South African authorities done more to monitor these proceedings, even if the UAE was basically seized with the matters internally? Should we have perhaps had a representative who was at each hearing or seized with monitoring on almost daily levels what was going on with this matter, to avoid what is now this 2-month gap between when a decision was taken in the UAE to a report by Bloomberg in the week saying that the Guptas had in fact now been spotted in Switzerland, and then confirmation today by government that indeed they were no longer the subject of an extradition hearing?
I can't tell, none of us can tell whether the South African government or the diplomatic representatives of the government was monitoring with sufficient vigilance. That would be speculation. What I can say is that we know that the South African government has gone back to the UAE several times and asked for further information. And so I understand at the end of March, there was a strongly worded request for further information. And so I understand from what the minister has said was that there was just no response. I mean, there's only so much you can do if the people on the other side are not willing to cooperate. No doubt more will come about the story, who is at fault, how all of it unfolded. People are going to speculate, inevitably, that the reason that the South African government was kept in the dark was because the authorities in the UAE, in the interests of retaining ties with India, have not cooperated as they should have with the South Africans. Again, that's speculation, but inevitably people will suspect that.
And then now the Gupta brothers, citizens of Vanuatu, were learning. They were spotted, as I was saying earlier, according to that Bloomberg article, going about their business in Switzerland, no longer on the red list, so they're able to travel freely. How much of a complication does that pose to the prospect of their recapture and potential prosecution here in South Africa?
That is a complication, no doubt. Yes, the red notice, the Interpol red notice has expired. There's no reason it should not be renewed. So actually positive steps need to be taken to get the red notice renewed. Secondly, the fact that they now have citizenship of Vanuatu is, and this is a report, I'm not sure if it's true, but to the extent that's true, that is problematic. Because presumably they could now go and take refuge in Vanuatu and then demand that there should be no extradition because they are citizens. And it's a fact, and it's well known, that Vanuatu is very generous in issuing the golden visa and the golden passport. And as I understand it from a report in the Guardian newspaper, amongst the people who've purchased Vanuatu citizenship are the Guptas. One can buy such a passport apparently for about $130,000. And in as much as there's no extradition agreement between South Africa and Vanuatu, that could indeed present a significant problem.
Michael Osborne, legal expert. Good to have your thoughts tonight, sir. Thank you for your time.